Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
Oh, Gary, what is this? Whoa. Okay, so yeah, this is the kind of image that just hits you in the head. So I'm going to describe what we see. Okay, so on the left side of the photo is just a road. It's one of the roads going into this area, for people who don't know, called Kennedy Town, Saingpun, on Hong Kong Island. On the right, the road is onto the, is basically facing sets of commercial shops. One is called Score Rich Trading Company, and that's the thing about these businesses. They've got these really weird, innocuous sounding names that are, the companies are registered as, like, Million Smiles Trading, or something really just kind of out there.
Happy Oceans Limited, yeah.
And so the image, it's a blue sky above. Far in the distance, you can see like the basically it's the buildings where they have the hydrofoil.
The Macau ferries. Thank
you very much. And on the right, about 1/3 of the image is drying in the sunshine, hundreds, thousands of tails.
Yep.
Okay, so I know what the story, I can guess what the story is, but why is this, well, how recent is this photo?
That one was a couple of years ago, I think. That was about 2 years ago. I just wanted to show something of what we see virtually every day. You can go down to Shenzhen pretty much any day where the sun's out. I mean, like right now it's gorgeous, and there's hardly any humidity. And the shark fin traders, mostly shark fins are arriving in Hong Kong already dried. So they get dried at source, whichever country is exporting, normally a third world developing country, they've already dried. But quite often, while they're in storage here, they might get damp or moist with the humidity. So quite often they'll vent them and air them out, and they use the streets and the pavements. And you'll be walking through Central, and it's not uncommon to be walking along and seeing pavements or even the road completely blocked with shark fins.
So, okay, so the pavement is this sort of dark 18% gray, if you know anything about photography. It's this kind of really deep, rich gray. And then the fins, the tails, are almost uniformly shaped in terms of size. They're all they're all kind of piled on top of each other, drying in the sun. And they're essentially the same color as the pavement. But because of the shadow and everything, you really kind of see this relief. And I guess they're spilling out of these not canvas, but these like cargo bags, and they're just drying in the sun. And they're actually the tails off of blue sharks, and blue sharks are pretty much the number one chosen shark of choice in the shark fin markets of Hong Kong. They're certainly the most prolific. And that shipment I came across had arrived from Spain. And Spain being one of the first or second largest exporters of shark fin to Hong Kong. Yeah.
And that shipment came in, and I started photographing. The funny part behind this whole thing was obviously the guy didn't know who I was, and I'm outside and I'm photographing stuff on the street, which is totally legal. And the sort of shop assistant guys that were the ones who were sort of putting things out and pulling things in, they're shooing me away and telling me I can't. And then the boss of the shop comes out and said, "Oh no, it's no problem. You can take whatever you want. Take whatever photos you want." He was he didn't really care.
Yeah.
And he knew I was legally within my right to photograph whatever I wanted.
Exactly.
And we just got chatting away. And I said, "No, it's just my son is doing a project on sharks." And I put on an Australian accent. In Australia, I said, "I don't know why everybody makes a big deal about all this shark fin stuff, because, we eat all the meat. And sharks are eaten in fish and chips in Australia." And, by doing that, it sort of diffused it. And the guy was pretty cool. And we're standing there, and it was a hot day. As you said, blue sky. It was a really hot day. and we're standing on the doorstep, and I was like a vampire waiting to be invited in. And while I'm talking to the guy, he just let me, he said, just come inside, it's too hot. So I went inside his shop, and we're chatting away, and I was like playing dumb of like, which fins are these? Are these the ones on the top, the jaws ones? And he's like, no, those are the pectorals, as he points to this giant 50-kilo sacks, these white sacks that are 50 kilos each. And then I see past his desk, and then there's the storeroom down the back, and it is chocker of sharks and shark fin. And I said, wow. And all this time I've got my SLR hanging around my neck, but it's actually recording.
Right.
So I'm recording the entire thing. And then I said, is there would it be possible to take a photo of that? It'd be great for my son's school project. He said, sure, if you can stand the smell. So I end up standing in this storeroom just as far as you can see. I mean, God, I don't even want to think how many sharks would have been in there. And it stank. I mean, it was like the uric acid that you get. It smells like cat's piss, basically. It's got this very unique smell. And I just literally got in there, and while I'm filming, I see all these CCTV cameras around. Wow. And I thought, let's get the hell out of here pretty quick. Because if he finds out at the time, he's got the director of Sea Shepherd Asia standing in his storeroom with a camera. It probably wouldn't go down too well. No. So I got out of there pretty quick, but got the footage.
So for people listening, I just want to stress something about the photo and the scale and all this stuff. So on the street, there's all these shark tails, and I would say they're very, very close in size to one another, and they're probably about, it looks like, so it's a tail, so it kind of looks like a scythe, right? So it's like a kind of, you got a fin at the top, and it kind of goes down, and then it goes to the bottom, and they've been cut off at the tail, so you can see the slice, and in there you could see the dried shark meat, and then the cartilage, and each one is at least 1.5 feet big, maybe even more. And just for scale, there are, let's just say there's at least 1,000 out in the sun. And you have to think that each tail is a shark that is at least, I don't know, like 3 or 4 yards or meters long. So probably a good 400 or 500 pound animal. And this little corner on the street, this one shop, and then as you say, there are bags and bags and bags and bags of stuff inside. It's just mind-boggling that, think about how many animals were just harvested like this, and what an impact that would make in the habitat. So it's Spain, right? So Spain is one of the worst culprits when it comes to shark fishing.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I did just to get a gauge of scale, I actually went down there at night and I set up some time-lapse cameras pointing at that shop. And then over the next few days, they were recording. And then I watched the guys come out with one of the sacks and lay out all the fins, and then another one. And then I actually watched as they collected them, and the entire street, not when it was the tails, because the tails are a bit bigger, but when it was just the fins, I could then calculate out how many fins made up that area of, it was 6 bags of sharks, so that's 300 kilos, and I worked out the dimensions of how much it would cover. And then from my photo inside, knowing roughly how many sacks there were, I mean, you could have covered them from Central all the way down to Kennedy Town.
So it's a couple of kilometers.
Along one street. And that's pretty scary.
That's a couple of kilometers, right? That's
one shop.
Yeah.
And we've got about 100 of these shops.
Yeah.
And that's the scale. So when people say 100 million sharks a year, which is a ridiculous number, it's far more than that. I've always said 250 million sharks are dying each year. And when people sort of go, oh, it's impossible, there's not that many sharks in the world. Well, you just need to come down and just have a look, and you can see the scale and the magnitude of it.
Yeah. No, it's heartbreaking. Yeah. And look, like I just to get away from something, I mean, my approach is more like it's just patently unsustainable. And when I had the podcast with Sharon Kwok, she was like, well, here's the thing, because it's dried and this stuff will last forever, they're just sitting on a massive amount of money, right? Like the shopkeepers, they're not going to change.
Well, they don't need to. I mean, it also there is something to bear in mind there. There are shark fin shops that only do shark fin, and then there's the dried seafood, and they do everything. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, obviously they could stop shark fin tomorrow, but still carry on their business. Their business of destroying the ocean en masse. Because what we do see in the markets, obviously, are all the other species. And most of those get completely overlooked. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're just putting together an in-depth study of the sea cucumber industry.
Right.
People go, sea cucumbers? Seriously? Nobody's done a big campaign on Save the Sea Cucumber, but we need to, because these are all integral species in a biodiverse web of life. And, we need every single one of these species. We all talk about the sharks, but meanwhile, abalone, fish maw,
sure,
which are the swim bladders, the stomachs of fish, croaker fish. All of these are coming in by the ton every single day. And if you think of a ton of sea cucumber, that's a hell of a lot of sea cucumbers. And they filter the ocean basically through their stomachs. I mean, they keep everything clear and clean. You take them out, you end up with dead zones. So they're important, abalone, and a lot of this is also connected with organized crime, funding organized crime.
Yeah.
So, especially with like the abalone in South Africa and things like that, that money then goes to buy weapons and arms, which is then used in, poaching, for example.
Right.
So it's all connected, which is why wildlife crime is, we've been sort of talking with ADM Capital and that, needs to go under the serious crime ordinance in Hong Kong, because at the moment it's just petty crimes. Sure. And we get people bringing in Totawaba swim bladders, which is the endangered swim bladders from Mexico, which is driving the vaquita porpoise to extinction. And these things are worth more than their weight in gold, by gram. We actually had a big bust a year ago, and I was allowed to go in with AFCD and a film crew, and we were actually doing a documentary at the time, Sea of Shadows, and we actually got in there, and there was two guys who bought 2 suitcases full of these swim bladders from Mexico. They flew from Mexico to Korea down to here. These guys flew halfway around the world. They didn't even have a spare change of underpants. They had nothing, just a suitcase full of swim bladders. And then they pleaded they didn't understand that they were illegal. Each of those were over $1.6 million US each case, full of them.
Well, okay, so okay.
Sorry,
we
should talk about something nice, actually, shouldn't we? But it's really hard. It's really hard. It's this is the future for our kids. I mean, I've got 2 lovely kids, and we've got to do something because it's happening on our watch. So.
Okay, look,
unfortunately, it's not great to talk about, but we have to.
No, we have to face it. We have to face it. I'm totally with you. Now, what I want to do is let's just rewind or pull back a little bit, just to kind of. Okay, I want to geek out for a second. You're clearly a photographer in that. The photo you made of the last photo there of the shark tails. I note that even though you're shooting it with a wide angle, there is still distortion correction, right? So there's like the buildings all look straight. It's still it's still you're at the end of the day you're still formally or technically creating these very well defined images. Okay, let's rewind. Okay, so. When did you kind of look at a camera and feel a sense of, oh, wait a second, this can be something? When did photography turn into a tool of expression for you?
Well, I've always been interested in photography ever since I was a kid. And, just did it as hobby stuff, getting the Practical Photographer magazine and trying to take these beautiful sort of sunsets and landscapes and things like that. And it was nice. You make some pretty pictures, but they weren't really, at those times it was film, and you'd print them out and they'd sit in a album somewhere and you'd never look at them ever again. And then I started doing underwater, which is a bit more technical. And it was only on a trip to Malta that I started to see. I went back to Malta where I grew up, and I went back 28 years later, and I went snorkeling in the bay I used to snorkel in, and it was all dead. And that's when I started to realize, hang on a minute, this has happened in my lifetime. And the more you start looking, the more you start seeing. And that's when I sort of really started to send messages out and pictures out that necessarily weren't pretty, but they told the story. Some of them you have to censor. I have to self-censor some of the stuff I put out because I've seen some pretty barbaric and horrible things. And, you've got to really, as much as you want to tell the story, some of it is just, I had a video. I was in Sri Lanka with Paul, and we were filming blue whales at the time, and in the early mornings we would go down to Marissa in the south of Sri Lanka, the port we went out from, and we'd go down early, go to the markets and see what sharks they were landing. And that was when we discovered manta rays and mobula rays being landed and having their gills cut out. And we started photographing this and thinking, this is odd. What's this for? And they said, it's for the Chinese market. And we were like, we've never heard of this before. So we started documenting it. But I never forget, I had one video and they were hacking this mobula ray, and I had the camera, I was filming between this guy's legs as they were literally cleaving this straight down the middle of the center line. And it hit some gallbladder or something. This green goo sort of squirted out. And I just thought, oh my God, I feel sick. And, I looked at the video footage and I said to Paul, I said, we're never going to be able to show this to anyone. It's worse than any horror movie. You do tend to see some of these things and think, as barbaric as it is, you got to almost censor some of it.
If you can find...
Because people will just switch off, if you see too much graphic stuff, they'll just switch off.
If you can make a screenshot from that footage to include... Because it'll be on the website and on the sort of the YouTube slideshow and all this stuff. Sometimes it's hard to look at, but we need to be shaken out of a kind of sleepy state. So
I'd have to find it. It's on one of my old video files.
Yeah.
This is when I was shooting some high def it was on a cassette on a video.
Oh, okay.
I'll see if I can find it.
Okay, listen.
It was just more of an example of, people with the imagery. You can, and Paul and Alex would confirm as well, there's only so far you can go.
Right.
Because if you go too far, then people just turn off.
Sure.
And they don't want to see it. They don't want to share it. The same with all the animal cruelty stuff that you see, people sharing. It gets to a point where people just turn off and they just don't want to know anymore. They don't want to see it. They go into almost a state of denial. So there's a very fine balance of how far you can go to tell the story.
Of your work, which I find just so admirable, it's pretty funny. Like, I had Doug Woodring on here, and I was so fawning, and I was so because he's done such really inspiring work that somebody commented, it's like, oh, what a nice little bromance you're having with Doug, and I was just like, but fuck, man, this guy's amazing. And in the same way, it's like, of all the things that you could put your attention to, of all the things that you could put your time and energy to, you're going out, you wake up at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m, you go out on your Zodiac, you get right in there. And so, okay, let's talk about two questions. One, what image, can you think of an image that you have made that was that had a really powerful reaction, but was actually inspiring in a positive, aspirational sense? Or are they all just like kind of?
There was, I don't know if you remember, 2012, we had a massive typhoon here that hit, and a ship lost 6 containers of pre-production plastic pellets, the tiny little beads, like they're called nurdles. They're almost like BB pellets. And we had 150 tons wash up on our beaches, and myself and Tracy Reed were the first ones to document it and try to get the message out. And I took one picture of Tracy holding her hands towards the camera with a handful of these. They look like beads. They look like pearls. I mean, they actually look really pretty, trickling through her fingertips. And I took this one picture, and that we used as the sort of grabber for our social media, because we were writing to the government at the time and saying, look, we have a major problem here. And nobody reacted. We even sent it to newspapers and nobody reacted. And we put that out on social media. We set up a Facebook group, and within a day we had like 7,000 followers in Hong Kong. And then we basically realized that we don't need the media anymore, the mainstream media. You can do it on social media. And we motivated and connected with so many people across Hong Kong in such a fast time that everybody was playing catch up afterwards. We had, the government suddenly realized it's a massive problem. We called a meeting, and I ended up chairing the government's disaster meeting.
Oh, wow.
Which was funny, because see that on the minute, Sea Shepherd chairing the disaster meeting for the pellet spill with all the government departments there. But it was great because we actually all got to work together, and we mobilized. One day we had 6,000 people on beaches, cleaning beaches. And these were people from all walks of life. We had young kids to grandparents. We had the government agencies. We had the people from the petrochemical company, Sinopec, whose bags they were. It wasn't their fault they were spilt, but it was their bags that were all over the beaches. We had NGOs. We had all these people side by side on the beach cleaning it. And it was beautiful.
Wow.
And that was the power of social media, and that was also the power of the image to invoke that started the ball rolling. Because without those photos, we couldn't have told the story.
Right. So how old how old are your kids?
8 and 12.
8 and 12.
Yeah, my son's 12, Jack, and Amber is 8.
Okay, let's say they turn to you, or some other 8 to 12-year-old, or some other parent, or whatever, anybody turns to you and says, Mr. Stokes, you've done so many great things. They wouldn't necessarily have that ridiculous accent, but they'd be like, you've done these amazing things. What advice can you give them if they want to start following your footsteps or get involved? I mean, the fact that you have been so active with Sea Shepherd, and then that was a kind of evolution from what you had been doing anyways, and now you've kind of gone even beyond Sea Shepherd to now for Oceans Asia. But so what kind of advice can you give people? I
think the most important thing is, conservation starts at home. You don't need to go to Antarctica, all the way to Antarctica, to save something. If everybody looked after their own backyard, there wouldn't be a problem. And there's so much people can do here. Everything down to what you put on your plate, knowing where it comes from, So even from your meal, you can start saving the world from what you have on your meal. You only need to watch Cowspiracy and movies like that, where you actually start seeing where your food is coming from. And all this myth of sustainable seafood. At the moment, I don't believe there is such a thing.
Right.
Of wild caught sustainable seafood.
Sure.
There's some fishing companies that are getting close, but they're also going out to sea alongside other vessels that are not sustainable.
Yeah.
And not trying to be. You've got illegal fishing going on. As soon as that comes in, there is no such thing as sustainable fishing. So, we have to get the enforcement, stop the illegal fishing boats. And if there's only legal fishing boats, then they can start talking about quota systems, bycatch, methods of catch. So then we might eventually, it's a pipe dream at the moment, but yeah, I mean, to go plant-based, I mean, we've seen a massive uptake in the switch to plant-based.
Yeah. Hey, Gary. Yeah, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, when it was a little while ago, you had just come back, I think, from a tour with Sea Shepherd, and one of the things about, I think, going on a sort of expedition with Sea Shepherd is that they say, hey, listen, I hope you're okay eating vegan. And you were running a restaurant. You came back and you're just like, man, I don't know if I want to run this restaurant the way it was. I think I might get out of the restaurant business. I don't know. I think.
Yeah. I think I met you in Singapore Airport, didn't I?
Right.
We were chatting in Singapore Airport. Yeah, I mean, I've been in food and beverage for a long time. And I've had shares in the restaurant. I opened a restaurant bar in Discovery Bay. I had small shares, and it got to the point where it was just going against everything I stood for. And I became, a hypocrite. I'm trying to save the world, and we were serving meat and fish at the time, even though I was already vegan. And I wanted out, and I said to the main shareholder, I want out. I want to sell my shares. And he said, actually, I want out. And, he was going to sell it to another chain, and I couldn't allow that to happen because we had, staff that had been with us for 12 years, who were loyal. They were like family. So I said to my wife, we're going to buy it. So we bought Hemingway's, and she said, but then now you're going to have 100% in a restaurant that's serving it. I said, no, I'm going to turn it vegan. And she said, you're insane. We're going to lose all our money. And we changed it vegan anyway, and it's been well received, because we attracted a whole new demographic of people. And also with, like I said, the plant-based movement now is no longer a grassroots movement. It's now mainstream. I mean, we're seeing McDonald's serving plant-based meats, it's fantastic. Yeah. The work of David Young of Green Common is an inspiration. I mean, he really is, paving the way in plant-based, innovation, and we're seeing a possible beyond, and now it's becoming almost acceptable, and we're seeing meat eaters coming in and saying, I'm going to have a couple of days a week where I'm not having meat. Sure, and that's fantastic. And this is where it goes back to where I say, what can people do? Look at what's on your plate. If it's an animal, for starters, it would have had an implication on the environment somewhere along the line. Sure. But other things, get in touch with your local beach cleanups. Look at what you're buying. So single-use plastic is one of the biggest threats to the ocean. Change one thing, just one thing in your daily routine. Take a reusable coffee cup, or take a reusable bag. If everybody does a small thing, we can have a massive difference. Sure. But that's the thing. I agree. So you don't have to go all the way out to Antarctica, or, I went to Timor chasing shark boats in Timor. You don't have to do that. But of course, there is also that option out there. So.
Well, Gary, you're way up there. Is there anything coming up that you would like to highlight, and that you think, man, this is a hot topic, or anything else you want to basically bring attention to? And I will do my best to.
Well, obviously, the most current thing at the moment and on everybody's mind is COVID-19, and everybody needs to stay safe and wear a mask. I mean, it's not even an issue, but make sure it's a reusable mask, please, because we don't want to be finding another 1.56 billion masks washing up in the environment. Yeah. So I think that's probably the one message to get out there at the moment is, stay safe. But if you've got to wear a mask, wear a reusable.
Huge. It sounds in the background that you're remodeling the kitchen. Are you taking down a wall?
No, I'm actually sat on a balcony, and I've got the waves breaking right below the balcony.
Nice. Poor you. Sounds like
it's
a rough
gorgeous.
Life.
Beautiful day in Hong Kong.
Oh, Gary, thank you so much. You're the best.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. It's been great to chat.
So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please
give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?